We have already seen one type of non-chord tone, the passing tone. The next type of non-chord tone we are going to look at is the neighbor tone. For a note to be a neighbor tone, a few criteria have to be met. 1. A neighbor tone must be between two chord tones. It is important to note that two chords need not be the same chord. For example, the first chord could be C and the second chord could be A. 2. A neighbor tone must move in stepwise motion. It may move by seconds, but not by thirds or any larger interval. 3. A neighbor tone must move in a discontinuous motion, away from and immediately return to the same chord tone. For example, if the neighbor tone moves a second higher than the preceding chord tone, it must move in the opposite direction and return to the chord tone. If the neighbor tone moves a second lower than the preceding chord tone, it must move in the opposite direction and return to the chord tone. It is important to note that the only difference between a neighbor tone and a passing tone is whether the motion is continuous or discontinuous. Let's look at some examples of neighbor tones. The chord in the left hand is a D minor chord. The chord tones are D, F, and A. E is therefore a non-chord tone. But what type of non-chord tone is it? It is a neighbor tone because it meets the three criteria. First of all, it is between two chord tones, D and D. It moves in a stepwise motion. It also moves in a discontinuous motion. That is, it moves away from one chord tone and returns to the same chord tone. We call E the upper neighbor tone because it is a second higher. If it had been a second lower, we would have called it the lower neighbor tone. Just like passing tones, neighbor tones can be either accented or non-accented. The previous example was an example of a non-accented neighbor tone because the neighbor tone fell on a weak beat. Now let's look at an example of an accented neighbor tone. The chord in the left hand is a D minor chord. The chord tones are therefore D, F, and A. E is the upper neighbor tone between the chord tones D and D. But since E falls on a strong beat, beat 1, it is therefore called an accented neighbor tone.